Hello, everyone. Glad to see so many folks were able to join us today. For those who don't know me, I'm Alexa Goodman and use she, they pronouns, and I'll be moderating our session today. I'd like to begin by acknowledging that we are in Mi'kma'ki, the ancestral and unceded territory of Mi'kmaq people. I'm currently located in Kipchibuktuk, also known as Halifax, and because we're all tuning in from different geographic places, I encourage you to share your location in the chat to have an idea of how far-reaching we are today. A bit about me: over the last 5 years, I've specialized in ghost gear research and management with emphasis on collaboration and shifting awareness into action. I wear many hats, and I'm currently co-chairing the Fishing Gear Coalition of Atlantic Canada and coordinating Coastal Action's Ghost Gear project, which I'll talk a little bit about later. But before we begin, here is a message from the Minister of Fisheries and Aquaculture.
Hello, everyone. As Minister of Fisheries and Aquaculture, I would like to welcome you to today's webinar on marine debris options to address that evolving issue. I'm pleased so many people registered for today's session. I'm very disappointed we couldn't be together today to discuss this in person, but this may be an opportunity for the future as well when we have our in-person meetings again, hopefully next year. We continue webinars so people that don't have the time to come can join us on a webinar series. I want to thank our sponsors, Farm Credit Canada, Nova Scotia Fisheries and Aquaculture Loan Board, as well as Lewisburg Seafoods and Oyster Grow Aqua Farming Systems. We really appreciate their support. I'm also very pleased that again this year we are co-hosting with the Aquaculture Association Nova Scotia on this digital series, as we will continue to do with our in-person series in the future. COVID has really changed how we do business in the province of Nova Scotia. And hopefully everybody is well and will stay well and continue to follow the protocols. Even after the vaccine has been administered, you can still contract the virus. So be very careful long into the future. It's exciting times for industry in Nova Scotia. Seafood, Nova Scotia seafood exports, both from the commercial fishery and the aquaculture industry, as a leading export. In Nova Scotia. And I believe this year we dropped slightly in our exports to 2.2 billion from 2.3 billion. But considering the work that was done and COVID problems that we've done extremely well. And I want to give a lot of credit to the industries, a lot of whom are here today on this call. Right from the fishermen at the wharf to the processors, the truck drivers, and indeed the whole industry. They're doing a great job. And our agri-food industries with fisheries, aquaculture, and agriculture are the leading employers in the province. And the fishing industry alone and aquaculture employ about 18,000 people and thousands more in supporting industries. So it's very important what you're doing, how we're working together. We need to increase awareness on preventing marine debris. It's very important to Nova Scotia communities. I continually get more and more complaints and photos sent to me of items washing up on the shore. And a lot of those items we see in these pictures are from commercial fishing. Not totally, but whatever we can do to prevent this, no matter where the material is coming from, we have to do it. We started our beach cleanup program last year. We'll help the community financially, remove some debris. And indeed, that is starting to catch on, and anyone that's interested in that should contact our department. This session will highlight some experts in the field and come across with some ideas and ways that we may be able to reduce this debris. And also we have to look at ways to clean it up as you see it. It's like going along the road, and if the road looks all full of Tim Hortons cups, it's not a very nice neighborhood you come to think first to start with. We're marketing worldwide to try to sell premium Nova Scotia products. And if these pictures and if this debris ever gets in the media, could damage our international marketing. If it damages international marketing, the price at the wharf will go down. So anybody that participates in dumping stuff overboard should think twice before they do it, because it could mean that your paycheck will be reduced in the not too distant future if our customers see that kind of activity and it's become more and more prevalent in international markets to make sure you have a clean, environmentally sound, and also a clean community. So keep that in mind. And again, thank you for everybody participating today, and hopefully come up with new innovative ideas we can support you with and continue this exciting process. Thank you again. Stay safe.
So just some Zoom housekeeping. As I'm sure you've already noticed, all participants have their audio and video turned off. If you'd like to ask a question, we encourage you to use the Q&A feature at the bottom of the screen, or you can also drop a question in the chat. We'll be monitoring the Q&A throughout the sessions. However, we're going to answer them at the end, but panelists may be able to answer in real time in between presentations. So again, feel free to answer and drop the questions in the chat as we keep moving through. We'd like to thank our presenting sponsors, FCC and Nova Scotia Fisheries and Aquaculture Loan Board. Since 2019, FCC is involved in seafood processing, and if you're looking for information, we encourage you to check out their website, as well as the website for the Nova Scotia Fisheries and Aquaculture Loan Board. This session today is brought to you by Louisbourg Seafoods Limited, as well as Oyster Grow Aquafarming Systems, and now we'll have 2 videos from each.
Tried to keep our waters clean. We don't throw any plastics here. We've last probably 30 years or so. We haven't been throwing any garbage back into our water, and you can see that now too. You see very little trash around our water, and everybody's on board with that. So it makes a big difference, and it's worked pretty good in this community right here.
And now for our panelists. Krista uses she, her pronouns and is an MSc candidate and microplastic researcher with the Department of Biological Sciences at the University of New Brunswick in St. John. Her research in the field of marine pollution focuses on microplastic concentration and toxicity in the intertidal sediments and potential for impact on benthic dwelling species in both the Bay of Fundy and Gulf of St. Lawrence region. Marcus uses he, him pronouns and has more than 20 years of experience in helping businesses develop their management of end-of-life materials and to close the loop on waste. 2 of his most recent projects have focused on the fishing industry, including an innovative proof of concept project to incorporate end-of-life fishing and aquaculture gear into plastic lumber, which you'll hear more about later. Sarah uses she, her pronouns and has focused on marine litter and waste since 2015 and is currently the head of the Marine Litter Unit of Environment Climate Change Canada and co-chairs the Global Partnership on the Marine Litter Steering Committee. Sarah has represented the Government of Canada for marine litter issues domestically and internationally, where her work focuses on advancing policy development, research, and coordination with emphasis on the Great Lakes. For those who are interested, there are also a few other upcoming sessions, and the information is here if you're interested, as well as on the website. So without further ado, we'll segue into our presentation. So I'll be kicking off our session today by discussing some context around marine debris and the extent of abandoned, lost, and discarded fishing gear, also known as ghost gear, in the Canadian Maritimes, and how interdisciplinary solutions are addressing the issue. I'll start by setting the context, talking about the size distinctions in marine debris. Then I'll move into ghost gear, the causes and effects. I'll talk about the Fishing Gear Coalition of Atlantic Canada and the extent of ghost gear in the Maritimes, and briefly touch on some solutions to lay the groundwork for the presentations that will follow from our panelists. As I'm sure most of you know, marine debris is considered any man-made solid material that somehow finds its way into marine or freshwater environments, which eventually makes its way into the ocean. While we often group all marine debris together, it's important to recognize the different types, as they all have different causes and effects, which may require their own unique solutions. Microplastics are classified as plastics that are between 1 and 5 millimeters in size and are typically invisible to the naked eye. Macro debris is the bigger stuff that you can see, like food and beverage packaging and fishing gear too. Meso debris is in between, with 5 to 25 millimeters in size, and could be pieces of macro debris as over time, plastic breaks down into smaller and smaller pieces. For example, fishing rope degrades into micro-sized threads over time, as you can see here in this picture that I just took a few days ago. Homing in more specifically, abandoned, lost, and discarded fishing gear, also called ghost gear, makes up a large portion of all marine debris. For the sake of ease of speech, I'm just simply going to call abandoned, lost, and discarded fishing gear ghost gear. So to test your knowledge, I have a polling question that I'm going to launch here. So feel free to give your best guess of how much by weight do you think ghost gear makes up macroplastics. I'll give another few seconds till we see the majority of participants have answered. Alrighty, a few more seconds. Alrighty. So it seems like there was an ununanimous decision, and the correct answer is 58%, according to the Global Ghost Gear Initiative, is what ghost gear makes up in terms of microplastics by weight. Many Atlantic Canadians are aware of the issue, as it's almost impossible to visit a shoreline without spotting some type of ghost gear or debris related to the fishing and aquaculture industry. Ghost gear is generated by unfavorable environmental conditions, gear conflicts, poor gear condition, mismanagement accidents, and inappropriate disposal at sea. Unfavorable environmental conditions include storms, high-intensity wave action, and various oceanographic features like tides, currents, and benthic characteristics, which can create rough at-sea conditions that can damage or sever gear, leading to losses, or move gear from one location to another, making it challenging to retrieve. Gear conflicts can include entanglement with marine mammals or with gear from other fish harvesters or vessels. Congestion is also a problem in areas of high concentrated gear, as gear can be set on top of one another, accidentally causing chafing if gear from the bottom is pulled up while there is gear on top. You also have to consider vandalism, as well as when lines can be severed by propellers from other vessels, whether that be ferries, shipping, and other industries, even recreational boaters. If gear is old, it can easily break, which is why gear is often changed over in terms of what rope is used to ensure that gear won't be lost if it's old. And gear can sometimes be missed when hauling in at the end of season, as accidents happen. However, it's really important to understand that harvesters don't want to lose gear. It's a costly loss to them, and they do often try their best to retrieve it. Ghost gear is concerning because it affects humans and the environment in 3 ways. It creates navigational hazards and safety concerns because it can damage propeller and other gear. It deteriorates marine ecosystem because it harms marine life, can destroy benthic habitat, and creates marine debris, both macro and micro, as I previously explained. And the 2 combined create economic losses from repair costs, reduced fishing time, and decreased catches. During Coastal Action's retrieval efforts in Southwest Nova Scotia this fall, they searched approximately 1,500 kilometers squared of seafloor for ghost gear in LFA 33 and 34, removing 7 tons of gear, where 66% was lobster traps and 22% was dragger cables. Most of the traps that they found were relatively new and were less than 4 years old, and they released 15 different species, including 239 lobsters and 7 groundfish, 5 of which were species at risk, like cod, cusk, and Atlantic wolffish. What's really interesting here is that based on the minimum size requirements for lobster, 67% of the lobsters released were market sized. And based on the project's preliminary findings, it's estimated that ghost gear may result in $458,000 in commercial losses from decrease annually in the inshore lobster fishery in Nova Scotia. And this is just an estimate, which is troubling. However, since the recent daylighting of the issue, quantification studies combined with collaborative on-the-ground efforts and governing support have shed light into the extent and impacts of ghost gear to help drive solutions. Many organizations and individuals have come together to act on the issue, one of them being the Fishing Gear Coalition of Atlantic Canada. The FGCAC has been working collaboratively on preventing and recovering end-of-life, abandoned, lost, and discarded fishing and aquaculture gear, and developing sustainable solutions to both retrieve and recycle these materials since they formed in November of 2018 out of the Clean Ocean Summit. The FGCAC is a not-for-profit under Canada's Not-for-Profit Corporations Act, and the coalition is composed of over 30 members from various backgrounds, including the fishing industry, waste management, gear manufacturers, governmental departments, First Nation groups, researchers, and community members. In the early coalescence, they noted the need for more baseline information backed by quantitative and qualitative information to help inform solutions. This led to their first project, completing the comprehensive report on the state of abandoned, lost, and discarded fishing gear in the Canadian Maritimes. The report details national and regional efforts around ALDFG, presents research on potential solutions to prevent and mitigate its effects, and shed light on the extent of gear loss in the region, which has been a long-standing question. For those who are interested, the full report is available on the Fishing Gear Coalition's website at fgcac.org. The FGCAC collaboratively hosted 6 focus groups in Yarmouth, Stellarton, Sydney, Summerside, Shediac, and Tracadie in the winter of 2019-2020 pre-pandemic to engage industry in gathering local information on the extent of gear loss and potential solutions. Combined with similar studies done throughout the Maritimes region, the focus group supported the understanding that depending on region, fishery, and gear type, there's an average loss of 0.5 to 2% of traps lost annually in maritime trap fisheries, which is less than the global average of 8.6%. And while these trap loss rates may seem low, if they're not retrieved, it adds up. And this is especially true if loss rates are multiplied by total license holders in each LFA. Not to mention that these values don't account for traps that are illegally discarded or retrieved. That makes knowing exactly how much gear remains at sea challenging. However, more information is continually being gathered by new projects and technologies and through DFO's mandatory gear loss reporting requirements. But regardless of the exact amount, it's undoubtedly a problem, and the call to action has been heard loud and clear by industry, government, and other stakeholders alike. We all have a role to play in managing marine debris, and I encourage you to consider how you can help if you aren't already. Hopefully the presentations from our panelists today shed some inspiration for you. Beyond ongoing retrieval efforts being conducted by several groups across Canada, long-term sustainable management solutions can be implemented to effectively address known drivers to the issue. Throughout my work with fishers, FGCAC members, and other stakeholders have proposed solutions like improving monitoring and reporting, scheduling collection days for end-of-life gear, and developing low-impact recycling and disposal systems for traps and rope. The FGCAC report comprehensively provides further details and information on potential solutions, many of which have helped inform members' projects recently funded through DFO's Ghost Gear Fund and other programs alike. Current solutions include DFO's soon-to-be-released gear loss reporting system, which will improve the reporting process for harvesters and organizations and individuals conducting retrieval efforts. Another notable solution is Coastal Action's rope recycling pilot project, funded through DFO's Ghost Gear Fund. They've set up bins at 9 wharves throughout the Southwest Nova Scotia region to test the effectiveness of wharf-side collection and recycling. And further details can be found on their website at coastalaction.org/ghost-gear. The FGCAC is also working on a project to develop regional solutions to end-of-life gear management, which we'll be hearing more from Marcus about soon. And I'd like to point out that these are just a few solutions. It seems like I'm learning more and more about new projects and solutions to address the issue of marine debris on nearly a weekly basis, which is promising and very hopeful. So now that we've set the stage for our session, I'm going to pass the screen over to Marcus. And while we transition, feel free to drop questions in the Q&A or in the chat. And I'll also post my email if you'd like to connect for the session after as well. All right, Marcus, over to you.
Thank you, Alexa. So moving on, looking a little more specifically at some of the solutions, a few of the projects that I've worked on looking at options to address end-of-life gear. So we'll start with a bit of an overview, looking to quantify the issue, understand what some of the problems and opportunities are, and then talk a little bit more about the need for systematic change, and then looking at some solutions for specifically at lobster traps and rope, and then a little bit of a discussion on next steps. So as part of the Fishing Gear Coalition project that Alexa mentioned, one of the first things we did was we looked at trying to understand how much gear is out there, and with a particular focus on the lobster industry. So based on the number of licenses and the average amount of rope used, we concluded there was anywhere from 600 to 1,200 tons a year. And some of that variation results from storm events, even the price of lobster, how often people are replacing their gear. And on the lobster trap side, approximately 200,000 plus traps a year reaching end of life. And with that, they sometimes find alternative uses, but there's still a large number. And again, a little bit more of a focus on wire traps, where there's some more identifiable solutions. So as part of that, we also looked at where is gear going now and where should it be going. So where are the 36 waste resource management facilities in Nova Scotia, which ones accept which gear, how much their tipping fees are. And there was quite a variation ranging from no tip fees at some, where the municipality is absorbing the cost of managing those materials, right through to $215 a ton for rope at some facilities. So quite a variance there. And what we found is there are a lot of sites already starting to recycle or repurpose the wire and wood traps, particularly in the last couple of years as some new solutions have come forward. But at this point in time, still the majority of the rope is being landfilled, with small amounts being temporarily stockpiled for use by repurposers. But again, there are some solutions coming. And I won't get into too much detail on the specifics, but for anyone that's interested, again, the full report is available on the FGCAC project webpage. So as part of the work, we started to engage with stakeholders, and we conducted a pre-consultation survey, and we had over 180 online responses from a wide variety of stakeholders. One of the questions was, is the development of a process and program related to the management of end-of-life fishing gear important? And we had a overwhelming support with 98% saying yes, there is a need for a program to manage gear. And that was really kind of our mandate to continue the work and to move forward. And, you know, we're quite, I guess, pleased with the amount of support. So as part of that same survey, we said, is fishing gear a problem or an opportunity, or is it both? So it was interesting again that while 9% of the survey respondents considered it to be a problem, there was a lot that considered it to be an opportunity, and 62% said it could be both a problem and an opportunity, depending on how the issue was addressed. So in that survey as well, we ranked some of the identified problems. We had an initial list that we started with based on some work that had come out of the earlier reports, the comprehensive report that Alexa referred to. And the first one on the problem of abandoned discarded gear, we really see that as a symptom of not having some of these other programs in place. So by not having identified options, consistency across the province, you know, sometimes long distances required to recycle the gear or to take it to landfill, it's really driving, you know, some of this abandoned discarded gear. And so again, some interesting responses there, as well as the opportunities, some of which mirror the problems. So, you know, managing gear responsibly protects the environment, and going back to the other slide, avoids that abandoned and discarded end-of-life gear that we would be seeing. But also, as referred to in the minister's address, you know, by having a program in place, there's an opportunity to protect the fish harvesters' livelihoods and Nova Scotia's reputation as stewards of the ocean. And also, I think it's important that there is a good potential here to create economic development solutions within Nova Scotia. So in addition to the economic benefits of the fishing industry, there's also economic benefits that come from managing this end-of-life material. So when we look at how our current system is set up, it's what I would call a linear economy. We take our natural resources, we turn them into a product, but then we just end up disposing or wasting them at the end of their life. So it's a one-way ticket from natural resources into the landfill without considerations for some of the other options along the way. And what we really need to be transitioning into is what's called a circular economy. And that keeps these resources in the natural environment, circulating around, being used over and over again. So as we see in some of these circles, and noting here where it says the smaller the circle, the smaller the impact, and the bigger the benefit. So as often as we can, we need to be maintaining and repairing these materials. So if there is a way to repair the lobster traps or to reuse them, and we do have quite a big reuse market, where in some of the areas where the tides aren't quite as strong, so say traps from the South Shore or Yarmouth area are making their way up to Cape Breton or Eastern Shore, where they can be used in the inshore fishery. So we also want to be able to reuse or redistribute, to remanufacture, and then ideally recover and recycle those materials. So a big part of this also goes into the design side of things. So when we're looking at a lobster trap, for example, we want to be designing a trap that's durable, that's easy to repair, has replacement parts available, and at end of life is easy to dismantle. So if we look at the trap, the traditional wire lobster trap on the left that has the concrete ballast, this is a very difficult material to deal with. You know, it used to be that to recycle these traps, the concrete had to be removed, and that required, you know, smashing it out with a sledgehammer or finding some other way to do it. There are newer options in the province now, but we look at the traps on the right, One, the plastic one from the Lobster Track company, and the new stainless steel ones for Assured. They have replaceable parts. They're much easier to deal with at end of life, and they're ideally designed to last a long time. We also, in between, and I don't have a picture here, one of the barbecue bottom traps, which again is easier to recycle because rather than having concrete ballast, it has ballast that's made of steel and again has the ability to be recycled. So what I'm going to do now is I will quickly launch a little poll here, just to sort of get people thinking a little bit about what are some of the things we can do with these materials in addition to designing them. So give folks a little bit of time to, and I do see we have a trending to the all of the above, and that is sort of where we're headed. So I'll look at some small scale and some large scale solutions where we talk about how we can go about using these for different products. So what we have is, I call small scale, which are, you know, things like retaining walls, using them for a Christmas tree, for a tourist attraction, which we see on a lot of waterfronts, you know, in our communities around Nova Scotia and Atlantic Canada. We see a lot leaving the province on the tops of cars as lawn ornaments that are going back to Ontario and other places, you know, maybe from people that have moved away. Now, while these are good, small opportunities to use a material, they don't deal with the volumes. Because remember earlier we said, you know, over 200,000 lobster traps per year. So what we want to be doing is looking at some of these industrial scale solutions. So in the last 3 to 4 years, we've had 3 large metal recyclers in Atlantic Canada that have put in a machine, they usually call them a car shredder. So as you can see in the picture with the machine, it's actually loading an entire car into the shredder. So these have the ability to shred lobster traps with the ballast and without needing a lot of dismantling. The issue is there's not a lot of value, because if you're paying by the ton and a lobster trap weighs 50 pounds and 30 of those pounds are concrete and 20 pounds might be steel and plastic, a lot of the value is lost, and also the market price really fluctuates for steel. But what it does do is it does provide solutions. So I know in our consultations we hear from different groups that say lobster traps aren't recyclable, but they actually are, and there's more and more programs being developed, particularly as a result of these pieces of equipment that are now available. On the rope side, a lot comes down to the resins, and on the right-hand side, we have what are called the resin identifying symbols. A lot of people like to refer to them as recycling symbols. That's really been a great coup on behalf of the plastics industry. They are not necessarily recyclable. They might be technically in the lab, but not on a large scale. So really what they are is resin identifiers. So traditionally we had a lot of rope that was number 5, which was polypropylene. And if something is a single material resin, it's much easier to recycle, and it tends to have a higher value at end of life. What we're seeing now is a lot more multi-material blends, which do provide advantages to the fishing industry because they can extend the life of the rope. It might make them, you know, so they don't stretch more, so they're easier to handle, so that they don't degrade from the UV. But unfortunately, it does make them more difficult to recycle. The other one is some changes that we've seen with regards to policy solutions. So in Maine, where the rope has to sink to bottom, we're now starting to see blends that have PET because it's a resin that sinks versus floats. So HDPE will float to the surface, or polypropylene will float to the surface, but PET or rope and lead will sink. So again, some of them are done for various policy reasons as well. So when we look at some small scale solutions, and this comes back to our flowers for the all for naught, we have a number of the baskets and things that are done by Naughty Girl and some mats by Kelptown Rope. So some very, innovative, small craft style solutions using a lot of these materials. But at the scale of 1,000 tons a year, we need to be looking at bigger industrial scale solutions. So one of these is a startup in Chester called Sustain, and they do take plastic and convert it into synthetic diesel. And that diesel can then be used in a closed loop, ideally to be able to use in your engine on your boat. So we would have rope being collected, turned into diesel, and then being used as a fuel source in the engines of the fishing boats. It's something similar again for the plastic lumber, where we have Goodwood Plastic Products in Stewiacke. And I started on a project with them, I guess it'd be about 2.5 years ago now, to do a proof of concept that we could actually take end-of-life fishing plastics, put them into plastic lumber, and make wood that's good, affordable, attractive, durable, and long-lasting. So they do a lot of material that's getting used for decks now. We see a picnic table that's been used in HRM and a lot of other things. The other thing we're starting to see is they're building large-scale timbers, and this is off of a wharf project that's going to be announced shortly. But these 10 by 10, I think they are dimension timbers, are used as a protective barrier along the side of the wharf, replacing the womanized lumber that was used in the past. And ideally, again, a nice closed loop solution, fishing rope collected at the harbors, turned into plastic lumber, going back on the wharves throughout Nova Scotia. So as we explore some of these solutions, so in the next stage for the Fishing Gear Coalition, looking at when we develop a solution, what needs to be done and how does that manage? We have what we call these interrelated considerations. So with cost, should we pay at the time of purchase versus paying at end of life as a tip fee? For the labor, should the fishers be able to sort their materials, or should we be paying a third party? Where do we store these materials between when they're generated and when they're collected? If they are being transported to a harbor, what's a reasonable distance to a drop-off location? As well as education, which is always a key component of any program, because you need to let people know how the programs work and how the materials are going to be managed. So what we really want to be doing is this transition from the linear economy to the circular economy. And I think we're seeing some good progress here in Nova Scotia. And as we build on the projects that Alexa mentioned, Coastal Action Program, the Fishing Gear Coalition Program, we're going to see this move. So thank you. And if there's any, I haven't had a chance to look, but I'm sure there's a few questions out there. And
thanks, Marcus. I'll drop Marcus's contact information in the chat for those who want to connect after the session. And we'll pass it over to Krista for her presentation. And while she gets set up, we do have a polling question that Krista will answer at the end of her presentation. So I'll launch it and I'll leave this open for the whole presentation. So there's no pressure to answer right away. Over to you, Krista.
Like I was saying, hi everyone, and thanks for joining us today. I am here to share with you my work on microplastics here in Atlantic Canada. So I'll let you guys finish up that poll while I just get started, and I will share my screen.
All right, we'll move on to Sarah's presentation and we'll come back to Krista after. There we go. All righty, take it away, Sarah.
Okay, great. So I take it you can see my screen. So and you can hear me, right? Great, thank you. So hello everyone, and thank you Alexa for the kind introduction earlier, and thanks to the organizers for putting this session together. I'm happy to be here today and discuss this very important issue, and really to shed some light about what the Government of Canada is doing to reduce plastic waste and marine litter, which includes macro and micro plastic pollution. So I'm going to just, hopefully this works. We'll jump in. Okay. So I'd just like to start talking about plastics at large and really discuss the issue as well as the opportunity that we have in front of us. So plastics play an important role in our everyday lives as well as in the global economy. This is due to a number of factors, due to their low cost, for example, durability, high performance, as well as unrivaled functionality. So it is an important material in our society, which is why we're seeing these numbers, this first bullet here of worldwide, over 380 million tons of plastics are being produced every year. This is using 6% of our current total oil production. And without any changes to our current consumption and production patterns, this is really anticipated to continue to significantly increase over time. It's also an important industry in Canada. It's a $35 billion industry employing nearly 100,000 people across the country. And this is, people who are engaged in making as well as recycling plastic products. So I want to make it clear that we do understand and recognize the value that plastics bring to our society. However, the challenge is that we're not managing this resource sustainably. And Canada, as well as the global average, is we don't have a really good record, we should say. Only 9% of our plastic waste is recycled, meaning it stays in our system and continues to be used, whereas over 90% of plastic waste is leaving the system, either going to landfills or is being incinerated or entering the environment as litter or pollution. And with that, plastic pollution has grave impacts on our ecosystems. It impacts tourism, fisheries, and other industries, including our livelihoods, as well as potentially our human health. There's about 8 million tons of plastic waste that enters the oceans every year from land. And this doesn't include the stats and the numbers that come from sea-based sources directly. So it is quite a significant source of pollution to our ocean systems. As well, globally, this costs society up to $2.5 trillion annually in ecological, economic, and social impacts. And Canada is not immune to this issue and to the impacts of plastic pollution. So in Canada, we throw away, as Canadians, over 3 million tons of plastic waste from our homes and businesses every year. And almost half of that just comes from packaging alone. The rest comes from a number of different sectors like construction, textiles, agriculture, automotive, and electronics, to name some. And while 9% of our waste gets recycled, the majority of our plastic waste ends up in landfills, as evidenced in our little graphic here in my slide. 1% enters the environment as pollution. And while that may seem like a low number, that 1% is really important because that's the plastic waste that is impacting the ecosystems as well as our wildlife, such as through ingestion or entanglement and other impacts. So it is an important value for us to look at. And in 2016, that equated to 29,000 tons of plastic waste. So this is an important issue for us to look at. In addition, I'd like to emphasize that this is also a lost resource. So what is ending up in our landfills or is being wasted is now lost in the economy, and we've lost that resource and don't have the ability to retain that value. And if we can move to a circular plastics economy, which Marcus had talked about so nicely in his presentation, we will be able to reduce plastic pollution as well as greenhouse gas emissions, create over 40,000 jobs, and generate billions of dollars in revenue by 2030 in Canada alone. So this is an opportunity for us to harness a valuable resource within our economy. And I know many of you are aware of our aquatic roots, particularly as I believe many of you are located in the Maritimes. I'm currently in Ottawa, if people were curious. And really with this slide, I just wanted to demonstrate for some additional context that our aquatic systems are incredibly important to our Canadian identity as well as our livelihoods. And protecting both our freshwater and marine systems is of the utmost importance. You can see here we have the longest coastline in the world. We also have about 20% of the world's total freshwater. And this is really an important resource for us to protect and maintain for current state as well as future generations. The other thing I'd like to identify is that there's many sources of plastic pollution and marine litter, so that come from land and sea-based sources. I've just identified a couple here, intentional as well as unintentional litter, inadequate or lack of access to waste management systems and infrastructure, as well as pollution that could be derived from aquatic activities, such as ghost gear that's been identified already. But it's important to keep in mind that all of our systems are interconnected. So this isn't only an ocean coastal issue. While it's deemed marine litter, this is something that impacts our land as well as our freshwater systems, and as debris enters the environment and it can be blown through to tributaries or make its way down rivers and make its way to the oceans, it's important that we recognize that this is an issue that impacts all Canadians and not just coastal communities. So with that, the government of Canada has committed to take action to reduce plastic waste and pollution. This is a very complex issue that requires multiple solutions by governments, industry, civil society, both internationally as well as domestically. So this slide here is to touch a little bit on our international work, and then the rest of the presentation I'll focus on what we're doing domestically, but I didn't want to miss out on showcasing some of our international efforts. Notably, in 2018, under Canada's G7 presidency, we spearheaded the Ocean Plastics Charter. It's the only one of its kind, and it lays out actions and specific targets, which I have included in the box to the right, along the plastics life cycle. So this is to take a holistic approach to reducing marine litter and recognizing that in order to reduce the pollution that's in the environment, we need to start from the beginning, and we need to look at the source materials and make those interventions throughout the life cycle of the product. So to date, I'm very pleased to say that 26 governments and over 70 businesses and organizations have signed on to the charter worldwide. So these groups have committed to a more resource efficient and life cycle approach to plastic stewardship, both on land and at sea. So this is an exciting initiative that we have led and continue to lead. I guess I'll make a plug while we're here that if anyone on this presentation is interested in joining the charter, feel free to reach out to me after, or you can connect through our website and get more information if you're interested in joining the charter. I'd also like to share that we have invested $100 million to help developing countries address plastic pollution. This is through a number of different mechanisms. So for example, we are funding the World Bank Probe Blue Fund, which addresses plastic waste in developing countries. We're also sparking innovation through a G7 Innovation Challenge on marine litter. We've also supported an incubator network that again is striving for innovations and spurring new ideas. And lastly, we've invested $6 million in an innovative private-public partnership through the World Economic Forum's Global Plastics Action Partnership. And this is helping countries to develop domestic action plans to address their marine litter issues as well. And then just to note, lastly, that we are very engaged on the issue internationally. We play a very active and leadership role in a number of different fora, including the G7, the G20, various bodies under the United Nations, the Arctic Council, etc. I could go on and on. There's many organizations and fora around the world that have taken up this charge, and the benefit being there's a lot of momentum for action around the world. So we're proud to be part of that discussion and momentum. And just to flag as an example, we've been working through the North American Commission for Environmental Cooperation, and through that, Canada, the United States, and Mexico, we've been working trilaterally to reduce marine litter. So far we've implemented 2 pilot projects in binational watersheds in the Salish Sea here in BC and Washington State, and in the Tijuana watershed bordering Mexico and the US, where we convened local stakeholders and identify local challenges and small scale and low cost solutions to be implemented. And since we've implemented those pilot projects, we've created a toolkit so that other communities can take on this approach in their own communities and find local solutions to address local challenges. And we'll be releasing that toolkit and other outreach materials shortly. So stay tuned for that. I'm going to jump into our domestic activities now. So Canada's adopted a vision of zero plastic waste by 2030. So this means we're aiming to keep all plastics in the economy and out of our landfills and the environment. This is moving us towards a circular plastics economy. And building on the Ocean Plastics Charter, the Canadian federal, provincial, and territorial environment ministers, through the Canadian Council of Ministers of the Environment, launched the Canada-wide strategy on zero plastic waste in 2018. This strategy provides the foundation for domestic action. It uses a circular economy approach and outlines 10 priority areas for action that the governments are working collaboratively towards this vision of zero plastic waste. In addition, the ministers also agreed to develop an action plan to help implement this strategy. So the action plan has been developed in 2 phases. The first phase, which was released in June 2019, focuses on the first 5 result areas of the strategy, which are identified in green on my slide on the left. So this is actions to address product design, single-use plastics, collection systems, markets, as well as recycling capacity in Canada. And this action plan is really focused on that plastics economy and increasing value recovery. So how do we get plastics to stay in our economy and out of our landfills and the environment? Whereas the phase 2 action plan, which was approved in this past July 2020, focuses on the latter half of the result areas of the strategy. So these 6 through 10, which are identified in blue on my screen. And this is really focusing on the plastic pollution side of the equation and also the enabling efforts to achieve zero plastic waste. So activities like consumer awareness, information exchange, research and monitoring, and global action, which help to support the strategy as a whole. And just to note here that these action plans were created in consultation with stakeholders across Canada. So through online surveys as well as workshops. We heard a lot from different Canadian experts and stakeholders to inform the development of those action plans. I'm not going to spend too much time going through these, but I just wanted to show you a snapshot of what's included in these action plans. So the phase 1 action plan includes commitments, for instance, working with provinces and territories to develop guidance on consistent extended producer responsibility programs. So these are programs where producers are made responsible for the plastic products and packaging that they create and that they're responsible for its end-of-life management when it becomes waste. We're also creating a roadmap to address priority single-use plastics, developing a path forward to improve the reuse, repair, and remanufacturing of plastic products, working with industry to advance circular economy solutions, assessing infrastructure needs for improved plastics management, and developing guidelines for government procurement practices, among others on this list. I'll have a link to our website at the end of this, and you can get more information and see the action plans yourself if you'd like further information. And then likewise for the phase 2 action plan, we're looking at strengthening information exchange and awareness raising by developing guidance on the use of key labels and terms, assessing waste management needs for ports, harbors, and marinas, also supporting best practices and innovations to address ghost gear, and evaluating those policy options for end-of-life management of fishing and aquaculture gear, as well as continuing to support capture and cleanup of plastics that are in the environment and developing guidance for a number of different potential sources of plastic pollution and leakage points, as well as continuing to strengthen research and monitoring and continuing to play an active role globally by sharing expertise and guidance, et cetera, that we develop. So now I'd like to jump into what we're doing federally with the Government of Canada specifically. And here, this outlines the different buckets and areas of work that we're advancing. And this is all part of the Government of Canada's comprehensive approach to reduce plastic waste and pollution and move us towards that vision of zero plastic waste by 2030. I'm not going to go into all of these in detail. I will touch on some of these after in later slides. I was trying to pick what might be of most interest to the group participating. So please feel free to give questions if you have any on any of these specific areas. But just to flag here that, again, we're going to continue to work with the provinces and territories to implement the Canada-wide strategy and action plan on zero plastic waste. We're also developing different measures through policy as well as potential regulations to prevent plastic waste and pollution. I'm going to touch on this one a bit more in a next slide. We're also leading by example by reducing plastic waste from our federal operations. This is by diverting 75% of our plastic waste by 2030, eliminating the unnecessary use of single-use plastics, and purchasing more sustainable products. We're also advancing science in support of Canada's plastic science agenda, which I will also touch on later. And we're investing in innovations. And this includes a nearly $19 million investment in Canadian innovators and small, medium-sized businesses through Canada's Plastics Innovation Challenges. And we have a number of these in place to look at different plastic challenges that we have in Canada. And then we're also investing in communities to mobilize on-the-ground actions as well as tackle plastic pollution and fishing gear. And lastly, our international actions, which I've already touched on. So I'd like to just touch briefly on our policies and regulations, our proposed integrated approach. So in October, the Government of Canada announced the next steps in its agenda to achieve zero plastic waste by 2030. And we published a discussion paper on a proposed integrated management approach to plastic products in order to prevent plastic waste and pollution. And this was up for public comment. This, as well as our strategy and action plan on zero plastic waste, takes into consideration the waste hierarchy, which I've included here on the side, and this helps us to prioritize and consider different actions. So one of the steps of our integrated approach is a proposed ban or restrictions on harmful single-use plastic items. And this is where there's evidence that they are found in the environment and that it may cause environmental harm, and that the item is often not recycled. And lastly, that they are readily available alternatives in place. So based on those criteria, the 6 items the government proposes to ban or restrict are plastic checkout bags, straws, stir sticks, 6-pack rings, cutlery, and foodware made from hard to recycle plastics. The plan also proposes improvements to recover and recycle plastic so that it stays in our economy and out of the environment. The government is proposing to establish recycled content requirements. This will help to spur innovations, as well as drive investment in recycling infrastructure, build capacity, and advance technologies in support of stronger product design to extend the life of materials. And then also we're working with provinces and territories and municipalities in the recovery and recycling of plastic waste. So this is work to continue to strengthen those existing programs and increase capacity for reuse and recovery. Right now, like I said, we went out for public comment on this proposed approach. We received a lot of good feedback from Canadians, so we're currently evaluating that feedback about what we've heard and considering that into our path forward. Okay, so touching on science, which is another important area for us, as this is our evidence base, which helps to inform our decision making and helps us to monitor performance over time. So this is a critical piece for us as well. So just wanted to highlight some of our recent announcements and milestones. So one is the Canada Plastic Science Agenda, which we launched in June 2019. And this identifies priority research areas across the entire life cycle in these areas. So looking at the detection and impacts in the environment, as well as looking at plastic design and alternatives, sustainable use of plastics, and waste diversion and recovery. And this was also informed through consultation. We hosted a science symposium in 2018, which fed into this work, as well as a best brains exchange. So lots of input throughout the process. Also, I'm happy to announce that in October 2020, we also published our science assessment on plastic pollution. And this summarizes the current state of science on the potential impacts of plastic pollution on environmental and human health. It also identifies future research gaps and informs federal decisions going forward as well. The key summary of the science assessment was that action is needed to reduce macro and microplastics that enter the environment in accordance with the precautionary principle. So we are continuing to take action to do that. We've also been investing in external research through the Increasing Knowledge on Plastic Pollution Initiative, the Plastic Science for a Cleaner Future program, as well as the Northern Contaminants program. So this is a way for us to support researchers across the country and to help fill those research gaps that have been identified through the Canada's Plastic Science Agenda, as well as the science assessment that was just published. And then getting into some on-the-ground actions. So through the Zero Plastic Waste Initiative, Canada has invested over $8 million since 2018 to support a number of different projects. We have 39 projects that have been funded to date, and these include activities to increase awareness as well as educational materials, such as we partnered with the Anthropocene Project, which has interactive educator school kits that are available for people to use. We've also supported pilot projects like the Canadian Council of the Great Lakes region, which has implemented a series of sea bins and litter traps throughout the Canadian Great Lakes harbors, and that's capturing debris and reporting findings of what's being captured in those sea bins. And we're also funding business sector-specific opportunities to build a circular plastics economy. So just one example is we've partnered with Fashion Takes Action that is looking at ways to improve textile recycling. So it's really split between these two different initiatives that we have. So through the Zero Plastic Waste Initiative, we're continuing to support projects that develop and enhance citizen science. One project we're funding is with Acadia University, that has been doing some citizen science work in Nova Scotia and developing a protocol for northern and remote communities. So that's an exciting project that will be launched soon. And then we're also supporting projects that mitigate leakage points or test different solutions that help with the capture and removal of plastic pollution. And then, as I said, we're supporting industry-based solutions that are looking to improve sustainable design, production, collection, and end-of-life management of plastics. And
There's
then,
a reminder that we do need to move on soon, so if you could start.
oh yeah, right. Yeah, I can't see anything flashing on my screen. So thank you, Alexa, for flagging. Whoop. This is my last slide anyway. So just to note that I know our Fisheries and Oceans colleagues have provided information to this forum in the past, but they've been doing significant investments, over $8.3 million to support 26 projects that are looking at ghost gear removal, responsible disposal, acquisition and piloting available technologies, as well as international leadership. So a lot of activities there. Oh, one last slide, but just one statement really to say is that in order to reduce marine litter, we need to address the sources and make systematic change across the life cycle of plastics. And that's been our approach. So we will continue to work with others and move our agenda forward. And I think that's it for me. And that's my contact information as well as our website. If you have more information or more questions, please feel free to reach out to me.
Thanks, Sarah. There is a question in the Q&A if you're able to answer as we pass off to Krista. Here's round 2 for the video presentation.
Hi, can you hear me? All right, we're going to give this another try. I kind of lost my ability to share the screen, so here we go. So this is one of my favorite places in the world. 12 years ago, I was introduced to what would quickly become one of my passions, and that's sea kayaking. I became a certified guide and instructor and happily began my first season of introducing people to the beauty that Nova Scotia's coastline had to offer. However, it quickly became apparent that this beauty was far from the perfect utopia that I once thought it was. So floating on the surface, stuck between the rocks and piling up in the beaches and small coves was the ugly truth of the matter. Immense amounts of garbage in all forms could be found in all of these coastal habitats. As guides and ultimately nature interpreters, we have a natural penchant for stewardship, and we are very, very proud of our province. But there is no way of hiding our trash problem. We make the best of all of our trips, often engaging the clients to help out. We regularly return with our kayaks loaded down like garbage barges as we picked and pulled bits and pieces out of the ocean along our travels. Everything from tangles of ropes, styrofoam, bottles, bags, balloons, other random bits and pieces, both big and small. Because I like to teach my clients about the ocean, whether the creatures we encounter or the plant life on the islands or the history of the area, I decided to do more research into the issue of ocean pollution, particularly focusing on marine debris. I spoke generally of how marine debris has led to an increase in coastal and marine wildlife mortality and a decrease in the availability of suitable coastal habitat. I also spoke of how we can reduce the chances of debris entering our waterways and always encourage clients to point out any debris, and I would add it to my pile to be brought back to shore. Now, it didn't take long for me to notice that much of my findings had one thing in common. The majority of the garbage that I had been finding was some variation of plastic, and that's what led me to the research path that I'll be talking to you about today. So to understand the problem with plastic pollution, we have to understand the properties of plastic. So that's where we'll start. What exactly is plastic? Plastic is a common term for a broad family of organic materials, most of which are derived from petroleum products and transformed through various chemical processes, creating weak or strong carbon-hydrogen bonds. The weaker of the two characterizes the amorphous structure found in polymers such as polyethylene, and the stronger bonds result in a crystalline structure characteristic of polystyrene, where the molecules are packed tightly together. This gives plastic such properties including flexibility of design for a variety of uses, high corrosion resistance, low weight, shatter resistance, and impermeability to water and air. So plastic is very rarely just plastic. Plastic comes in a variety of shapes and textures, which gives them their versatility. And it is because of this requirement for versatility that they're enriched by a variety of additives that are designed to improve performance, to reduce the cost, and to enhance the final properties. These properties also contribute to its durability, giving it its persistent nature, particularly once it enters the environment. So plastic itself, without all these additives, can be seen as biologically inert and virtually non-toxic. However, up to 50% of plastic production is made up of these additives, which can have serious health effects such as endocrine disruption, developmental concerns, and even cancer. The additives used in the manufacturing of commercial plastics pose a significant problem once the plastic enters its end-of-life stage and the additives begin to be released into the environment where it's been deposited. And plastic is persistent. The amount of time for plastic to completely degrade is very long and poorly understood. Now, during this process, it breaks up into what we call microplastics. Despite only recently being classified as a contaminant of emerging concern, these small plastic particles were first noted in the early 1970s. They are defined by most studies as plastic pieces smaller than 5 millimeters and are categorized as primary, referring to the raw materials, or secondary, which is the result of degradation of larger plastic items. So degradation can occur through a combination of photo, thermal, mechanical, and to some degree biodegradation, depending on the type of plastic. And it also depends on the compounded effect of the additives and the environmental conditions in which the plastic has been deposited. Now, this is an important factor. Consider that plastic sinks into deep waters. At certain depth, there is no light, so photodegradation is not possible, nor is thermal degradation if the water is cold. Turbidity can also be reduced at depth, along with the possibility of biodegradation. Basically, this plastic, depending on its composition, can be hanging out in its original state, causing trouble for a very, very long time. In contrast, plastics can break down faster in shallower coastal waters and shorelines where these degrading forces are much higher. For these plastics, as they continue to break up and become microplastics, they see an increase in surface area, in turn increasing the opportunity for the leaching of plastic additives. But it also brings to light another problem. Microplastics are typically hydrophobic, meaning that the increased surface area can allow for the accumulation of other hydrophobic pollutants, some of which we're familiar with. For example, polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons, polybrominated diphenyl ethers, polychlorinated biphenyls, phthalates, and other pesticides such as DDT. So like I mentioned earlier, the majority of plastic pollution can be attributed to land-based activities. Trash from poorly managed and overflowing sources like landfills and temporary garbage receptacles, and from littering. As anyone who has lived near a flowing body of water knows, this garbage is rinsed by rainfall or blown by the wind and becomes trapped in ditches and ends up being flushed into the local river systems, which of course eventually enters the ocean environment. The St. John River is a good local example. Think, for instance, of the amount of pollutants that are flushed out to sea also after recent melts and flooding events. Now, a better example, or a bigger example, would be the St. Lawrence River system, which connects the Great Lakes with the Atlantic Ocean and acts as a primary drainage for the Great Lakes Basin. This river runs from Ontario through the province of Quebec, with the banks of this river highly populated in many regions, and it houses the St. Lawrence Seaway, a heavily traveled commercial shipping route. Also consider that this body of water, when thinking of wastewater discharges, not everything is caught by wastewater treatment plants. And this is obvious to anyone who has seen some very interesting yet very personal products that are often flushed down the toilet and make their way to the shoreline. This wastewater is also a big source of microbeads from personal products, as well as microplastics in the form of fibers from laundry effluent. Now think of your lint trap in your dryer. That is what's left over after the fabrics are washed and rinsed and the gray water is flushed away. And of course, we have the leftover 20% that can be attributed to at-sea industrial activities such as shipping, fishing, and aquaculture industries. So as we know, the Bay of Fundy is home to all three of these industries. So as most of us know, the Bay of Fundy lies between the provinces of Nova Scotia and New Brunswick and touches the US state of Maine. It's known for extremely high semi-diurnal tides that can reach up to 16 meters in some areas. The bay is funnel shaped, making the tides that flow through the channel extremely powerful, with about 100 billion tons of water flowing in and out of the bay in one 12-hour tidal cycle. Now, the coastal sediments of the Bay of Fundy are a critical habitat for a variety of benthic invertebrates and represent important feeding areas for coastal mammals and both local and migratory shorebird populations. A 2017 study confirmed the presence of microplastics in all 15 samples taken from the Bay of Fundy coastline in New Brunswick. Another study observed that the presence of the visible plastic debris is not a reliable indicator of microplastic concentration in the adjacent or underlying sediments, despite a high amount of source material and exposure to environmental conditions conducive for secondary microplastic production. However, it was thought that the shoreline buildup of visible debris may be of greater significance in the Bay of Fundy region for several reasons. Oceanographic features driving mechanical breakdown like currents, upwellings, and extreme tidal activity, coupled with increased sun exposure on extensive tidal flats, suggests that the rate of localized degradation of plastic may be intensified in this region. Now, my current project has taken this information and builds on it by focusing on both the sediments and the benthic inhabitants of the intertidal areas of the Bay of Fundy. So the primary objective of my research was to examine the relationship between microplastic concentrations observed in bivalve tissue collected from selected sites within the Bay of Fundy and the concentration found in the surrounding intertidal sediment. The prediction being that bivalves found in sediment with higher microplastic concentration will contain higher amounts of microplastic in their tissue. My secondary objective was to characterize the relationship between visible onshore debris accumulation and microplastic accumulation within the adjacent sediment. The prediction here being that the coastal areas found to have higher amounts of shoreline debris will also have higher microplastic concentrations in the sediment. So the first stage of the project involved selection of study sites. These chosen sample sites represent a diverse cross-section of attributes such as exposed active waters, sheltered bays, estuaries, marine protected areas, public and municipal areas, and areas close to industrial activities. Sites were chosen from both New Brunswick and Nova Scotia, and we also included Grand Manan Island. At low tide, bivalves were collected from each site using a handheld sediment corer. A sediment sample was removed from the undisturbed sediment directly adjacent to the bivalve harvest site. At this point, a shoreline debris assessment was also performed. To prepare the sediment, samples were dried and microplastics were extracted from each sample by density using a concentrated salt solution. This separates the less dense solids, like the plastics, from the mineral components, and the solution containing the floating debris was collected and passed through a filter with a pore size of 0.22 microns. And using a dissecting microscope, identifiable microplastics were collected, counted, and classified by general appearance as a sphere, fragment, flake, or fiber. To analyze the microplastic concentration in the bivalves, tissues from the entire organism were extracted from the shell, weighed, and digested using a 10% potassium hydroxide solution. The microplastics were extracted from the digested sample when passed through a 0.22 micron filter. And again, using a dissecting microscope, the microplastics were collected, counted, and classified by general appearance. So the main variables assessed in the study were, number one, the amount of microplastics in the bivalves as expressed in particles per gram of tissue compared to the surrounding sediment, and the amount of microplastics in the intertidal sediment as compared to the amount of shoreline debris. The analysis of these variables showed that there is no significant relationship between the amount of microplastics found in bivalve tissue and the amount found in the immediate habitat. This lack of significant relationship extends itself to both the species level and the debris factor assigned to each study site. When assessing the study locations, a significant relationship was found between specific study sites and the amount of microplastics found in the bivalves, particularly in sites of Burnt Coat, Gasborough, Marsh Road in Digby County, and Thorn Cove. In New Brunswick, only Oak Bay and Laurenville showed this result. However, this is not explained by shoreline debris factor included in the site assessments, and in taking a step farther, it does not appear to be related to the distance to the nearest population center. Note that the legend reads from top to bottom as mussels, macoma, ribbed mussels, razor clams, and softshell clams at the bottom, with softshell clams being the dominant species found at most sites. Surprisingly, the most significant determining factor of microplastics in bivalve tissue was the weight of the individual itself. Smaller bivalves, regardless of species, contained more microplastics per gram of tissue than larger bivalves. Unfortunately, this could mean that smaller benthic organisms, such as the adult macoma clam or the juvenile stages of other larger bivalves, are at greater risk. This may be due to different filtration rates and the limited ability of the smaller bivalves to expel foreign particles once they are ingested. This is unfortunate not only because the bivalves are an important food source for other marine and coastal wildlife, but species such as softshell clams and blue mussels are also important to the economic well-being of many living in Eastern Canada's coastal communities. So we know that microplastics present a physical and toxicological risk to marine and coastal wildlife. For benthic inhabitants, not only are they at risk, but they can become a vector in the aquatic and terrestrial food chains. In addition, layers of sunken plastic debris can create toxic and anoxic conditions resulting in damage to benthic habitats. Now, we also know that microplastics are a global issue, but we need to understand what is going on in our own region. This study adds to the current baseline data that will characterize the magnitude of microplastic concentration in the Bay of Fundy sediments and will lead to a better understanding of the potential impact on the organisms that rely on this habitat. The culmination of these data and the communication of its potential consequences can bring about a much needed change in industry, policy, and human behavior in our aim to stop the flow of and to reduce the harm caused by plastic pollution. Thank you.
Thank you, Krista, for that presentation, the recording. We do have a bit of time for a Q&A, and there is a great discussion from Catherine in the Q&A that I think we should answer live. So I'll just read it out. The fishing sector is currently struggling to solve the two worthy sustainable goals of eliminating ghost gear and reducing entanglements for non-target species, North Atlantic right whale in particular. Looking at these two challenges in isolation has led to management measures that work for one, but then exacerbate the other. Similarly, when it comes to packaging, we have demands to reduce environmental impact, but also to increase food safety and preservation. In both of these examples, regulatory barriers make adaptation and innovation more challenging. How are national and global initiatives tackling the regulatory challenges inherent in solving the complex problem of plastic waste? Sarah, I'm wondering if this is something that you could speak to.
Yes, absolutely. It's a great question. So traditionally, things have been dealt with in isolation, which is why globally as well as domestically, we're moving towards this comprehensive approach. And that's the looking at those solutions. So it's across the value chain, but also within the value chain. And so making sure that the solutions that we're putting forward in each step of those pieces are going to complement and work together. So for instance, when looking at product design, that we're looking at how that product design is also going to interact with collection systems, as well as, you know, the infrastructure that's currently in place, and making sure that we have complementarity across those different parts of the value chain. So it makes it quite complex, but that's what's required in order to really make systemic change. So for us in evaluating regulations, we're looking at a number of different considerations. So we do look at the environmental impacts. We also look at economic considerations. We're also looking at social and economic considerations as well, and human health. So a good example is with COVID, for which we're all dealing with, is there's an increase in PPE, so personal protective equipment, waste as well as litter. However, we recognize that the protection of human health is of the utmost importance, particularly during a global pandemic. So we're looking at what are those solutions to make sure that the population is still safe, but also finding innovative ways to reduce plastic waste and the pollution that would come from increased litter and waste of PPE items. So the answer being, we need to look at multiple variables at the same time. And as we advance those solutions and investments, it's working with the different stakeholders across those value chain pieces and segments, as well as making sure that they're going to be complementary to each other.
Marcus or Krista, do you have anything to add to Sarah's point? That was a fabulous answer, Sarah.
It was. That was, yeah, that covered everything that I would know of.
And I think it just really nails the importance of interdisciplinary solutions and really collaborative efforts from all fronts, and being able to talk to one another and share our knowledge and our ideas. And there really, I have noticed it, at least in the past few years, that there has been a strong shift in the willingness to be able to work together and share that information. Are there any other last few questions? Krista, I see that there's one that you'd like to answer live.
Yes. The question is from Erin Dan, and it is, do you know of any recent research directly looking at the impact of microplastics on human health? And the answer to that is I do not. It is a big question, and that question comes to me all the time. All we know is that microplastics are in the guts and in the tissue of certain types of edible seafood that like for instance, I just answered another question. I typed a response saying that there is translocation in the gut system into the tissue system, which is the part we eat. We don't usually eat the guts of bivalves, crustaceans, and fish. So there is the chances that we're going to be eating microplastics when we eat seafood. That being said, it's not going to be in large amounts at this point. And what we know is that plastics can adhere to some of those terrible toxins that I had mentioned in the recording there. But no, there isn't that much done right now on looking at human health. And a part of that problem is that, like I said, like the presentation mentioned, as plastics get smaller and smaller, the surface area increases. So a lot of what we're looking at for human health right now is extending into the nanoplastics territory, which is, whew, it's ridiculous. It's just one of those big balls of wax that gets bigger and bigger when it gets smaller and smaller. So that is something that people are looking at. But to this point, I don't have a good answer for that, unfortunately. But if you want to put it into perspective, a lot of my work, or at least a big problem with my work, is mitigating contaminating factors. So the amount of microplastics that are in the air that we breathe into our lungs is ridiculous. And the amount of microplastics in our water systems is equally ridiculous. I have to filter everything, and you would not believe how many microplastics I would find in regular tap water or even bottled water, honestly. I did a class with a bunch of high school students here, and that was a part of what we did is we took household items, we dissolved them, and we looked at microplastic contents, and we are ingesting it as we speak. So it's not only from the seafood that, that we're consuming it. And that's the best answer I have.
It's troubling to think that we don't quite know exactly what the impacts are, but we can expect them nonetheless. I mean, plastic
Exactly.
in everything that we do and we ingest it. I mean, I'm pretty sure there was a study done by WWF that released, you know, we consume like a credit card's worth of plastic every year.
And that's not surprising. That is not surprising. When you really think about it, yeah. So seafood is not going to be the big culprit there at the end of the day.
We're all responsible in some way or another. There was one other question that was dropped in the chat that wasn't in the Q&A that I do want to just quickly mention. It was from Ryan on how efficient is the conversion of polypropylene rope to diesel. Coastal Action's pilot recycling program is trying to figure out just how efficient it is and how we can improve that system and whether or not it is a viable long-term solution. So I think we'll have more information in the next year and a half around that. Marcus, do you have anything to add there?
No, other than what I typed in. I know it is a net positive when they do their greenhouse gas numbers. They're producing a fair bit more energy out from the plastic than to produce the diesel, but I don't know the specifics on that, and I think it varies by resin type and by, you know, degree of cleanliness, etc.
All right. Well, with that, we are a little bit over time, and I want to thank everyone for joining us today. I encourage you, if you have questions for any of the panelists or for myself, feel free to reach out by email, and I hope you have a lovely afternoon. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.